السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. نظام الكاست في الهند هو تقسيم عرقي أم تقسيم اجتماعي طبقي لأشخاص ينتمون إلى العرق نفسه؟ وما حقيقة الانتقاد الموجه إلى المهاتما غاندي المتعلق بمقاربته لنظام الكاست؟ نظام الكاست في الهند بين الأمس واليوم وغدا، مع المؤرخ فيصل دفجي من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. لماذا التعرض لشخص المهاتما غاندي ورمزيته؟ وهل هو بالأمر الجيد؟ هذا ما يشير إليه أحد الباحثين المستائين من الإساءة إلى هذا الرجل الفريد، إذ يرى ذلك فرصة للتذكير بما يرمز إليه غاندي، فهو كان أكثر راديكالية وتقدمية من أكثر رفاقه الذين عاصروه. فالمهاتما أشار إلى أن ترددنا في أي طريق نسلك سيتبدد حالما نسأل كيف سيتأثر الشخص الأكثر عجزا وضعفا الذي عرفناه بخيارنا. كلام الباحث الهندي جاء شجبا لكتاب جديد يزعم أن غاندي ازدرى ذوي البشرة الملونة خلال سنواته التي أمضاها في جنوب أفريقيا ودعم الإمبريالية البريطانية. ويشير الباحث إلى جواب غاندي عندما سئل في 1946 قبل استقلال الهند كيف يصف الهند المستقلة كما يتمنى أن يراها، فرسم شكلا هندسيا وقال إنه لا يريد هرما بل دائرة من المساواة التامة، وفي هذه الدائرة الأخير سيكون الأول. في الواقع لن يكون هناك لا أول ولا آخر، وسيكون الفرد المواطن لا الرئيس ولا رئيس الوزراء في مركز الدائرة. غاندي أراد المساواة مع الإخاء، ومع العدالة سعى إلى التصالح والتسامح. الدكتور فيصل دفجي المحاضر في تاريخ جنوب آسيا المعاصر والعضو في إدارة كلية سانت أنتوني في جامعة أكسفورد يشرح النظام الطبقي في الهند وتركيباته الذي أضحى قضية رئيسية في سياسة الهند ومن صنع هذا النظام ولأي أسباب، ويناقش انتقادات معينة للمهاتما غاندي ومقاربته للنظام الطبقي، ولماذا يهاجم البعض اليوم المهاتما. Dr. Faisal Devji, reader in modern South Asian history and fellow of the St. Anthony College at the University of Oxford. Welcome to the Insight, sir.
Thank you.
You're most welcome, sir. Well, Dr. Faisal, since the 1980s, caste has become a major issue in the politics of India. Can you please explain what do we mean by the caste system, its structures, who constructed this system, and for what reason?
Caste it's a very big issue. It's a very ancient institution in many ways because we...
Thousands and thousands of years.
So we hear about it in texts that go back well over 1,000 years. But of course it's changed over this time as well. And there is a way in which you can argue that during the 19th century when the British were ruling India, all communities and all groups were transformed, because they started receiving a kind of legal recognition. And they were defined in terms of their numbers, they were counted up by the census reports, and they were often given certain kinds of rights. So they
privileges,
became...
you mean?
Privileges of various kinds, graded, and so they were redefined, you can say. And eventually they started participating in modern electoral politics once elections came to be introduced to the country. But the word caste that we use is of Portuguese derivation. And the Portuguese, of course, had come as traders and then as conquerors to India as early as the 16th century. Now, caste names two kinds of objects. One is a way of thinking about society that divides it into four groups. The group of the Brahmins or the priests, the priestly castes.
So the four castes that you're talking about.
Yes.
Okay. But you also have subcastes.
Yeah, exactly. So there are four big divisions.
Okay.
But in fact, the castes that count are the so-called subcastes. They're the, within each division, there are many hundreds, if not thousands, of different castes.
Wow.
So you might have many thousands of castes who are all Brahmins, but they don't intermarry with each other. They only marry within their group.
How do people in India, in the Indian subcontinent, how do they identify themselves with their own caste? Is it related to something like a tribal issue, a family issue, a social issue, a racial issue, or what? We can't understand the caste system.
Well, if you think about in some ways, if you look at the four big ones, right, they're actually common between Europe and India. So even in medieval Europe, for instance, you have society that's graded into four different parts. The priestly class, which is the top, the class of aristocrats and kings and warriors, which is the second, the class of merchants and traders, which is the third, and the class of peasants and farmers, which is the fourth. And then outside the system are the so-called outcasts.
The Untouchables.
They were called Untouchables for a long time. Now it's illegal
or
to use
in India,
that.
the Dalits.
Exactly. So the word untouchable was the one that was used in the past, and now it's illegal to use that term. And the word Dalit is a word that was invented in the 20th century by a very important untouchable leader to rename this group.
Ambedkar?
Dr. Ambedkar, yes.
Ambedkar, right. Now, traditional scholars identified caste system with Hinduism in the Indian subcontinent, but the system is found also in other religions, albeit in a small amount, like for example in Buddhism, in Islam, in Christianity, in Sikhism, in Judaism. For example, contrary to the Quranic worldview, Muslims in India have a caste system. Is that true?
Yes, very largely. And in some places, it's simply a kind of attenuated form of identification. And what that means is that people will marry within their caste, but they don't otherwise think of themselves as belonging to a caste. And there is no untouchability, for instance. In other places, it still works in a gravely discriminatory fashion. So, for instance, sometimes you hear from Pakistan these stories of, there is a recent horrific story of a Christian woman who went to pull water from a well in a village of the Punjab in Pakistan. And she was castigated for this and accused of insulting Islam and persecuted. And her whole family had to leave, people were killed, etc. And this was interpreted as a Christian-Muslim conflict. It wasn't. It was a caste conflict. Because there the lower castes had converted to Christianity, from Hinduism to Christianity, once Pakistan was created.
Right.
Because Christianity represented a way forward, a way towards freedom. But what she did, by taking water from an upper caste well, she broke a primary caste taboo. Because the thing about caste in its traditional functioning is that you cannot share water. You cannot take someone else's water. You can only share certain kinds of food. So there's an absolute division. It's not simply a question that you can't marry so-and-so. You cannot even...
This is very harsh.
It is very harsh. And you see how it comes into religious conflict in a disguised way. It's difficult because it's ancient, it's distinctive, but also I think one reason why it is so resilient is that it allows Indian society to govern itself. Caste allows Indian society to rule itself without a government.
Let me just understand something here, like Dr. Faisal. If somebody from the Untouchables, like for example, they have children and they go and study and get educated and become front runners in their domain, do they move to another caste and become like separated from their parents?
No, that doesn't happen, but it can happen over time, gradually.
Okay.
Which is to say, there is a process which scholars call Sanskritization, and the root word, of course, is Sanskrit, which is the ancient sacred language of Hinduism. And Sanskritization means that if you adopt high caste habits, for instance, if you stop eating meat, if you become vegetarian, if you wear certain kinds of clothes, if you worship certain kinds of gods and worship in the manner in which high castes worship, then gradually, maybe over a few generations, you can start claiming that you are in fact higher caste.
Upgraded
Exactly.
to this caste.
So that has happened in the past, and it continues to happen.
Yes. Now, the caste system is thousands of years old, but still defines the status of hundreds of millions of people in India. So-called untouchables, or the Dalits today, continue to suffer discrimination. Castes rarely intermarry and are definitely not changeable. This issue. The maltreatment of Dalits in India has been described by some authors as India's hidden apartheid, and discrimination against lower castes is illegal in India under Article 15 of its constitution. This is very paradoxical, one tend not to understand. Yet this did not block the rising violence against the Dalits. Why? I mean, lots of incidents, especially, raping women, like 5 men from an upper caste, they rape a woman, they have the right to rape a woman from a lower caste, from the Dalits.
In my view, it's precisely because the traditional forms of caste are breaking down that you have the increase of violence.
Maybe the new generation now is trying to get or to escape from such kind of behavior.
Exactly, but it's this form of escape that makes the violence possible.
True.
Right? Because those who have power do not want to lose power.
Right.
So in a way, in a paradoxical way, it's the breakdown of a caste system that produces a different kind of violence.
Is it ever breakable?
I hope so, because it is a system that is certainly immoral and unjust. And India, I don't mean India as a country, I mean all of South Asia, because Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, and Sri Lanka also have this, without distinction of religion.
It's not a racial, it's not a religious distinction, it's more
it's a civilizational,
a social, distinction more.
It comes from that civilization, and it has had a different set of meanings over time, and including more than 1,000 years ago, there were people even then who rejected it. So the Buddhists rejected it. Buddhism in India rejected it.
Right, Dr. Devji, allow me to stop now for a short break, and then afterwards we're going to discuss more about certain criticisms of the Mahatma Gandhi and his approach of the caste system after the break. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود، لا تذهبوا بعيدا. من أبرز المدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان في الهند والرجل الرئيس الذي تولى صياغة الدستور الهندي الحديث في أربعينيات القرن الماضي B.R. أمبيدكار، ولد ضمن طبقة كانت مصنفة على أنها المحظور لمسهم، وقد كتب على نحو مكثف عن التمييز والأذى والتأثير المأساوي للنظام الطبقي في الهند. من ناحية أخرى فإن المهاتما غاندي قال إن النظام الطبقي أنقذ الهندوسية من التفكك، ورأى أن التقسيم وفقا لمنظومة فارناس إلى 4 طبقات على أنه أساسي وطبيعي وضروري. البروفيسور فيصل دفجي الخبير المتخصص في تاريخ الهند، كيف يفسر لنا هذا؟
Yes, Gandhi had a very ambiguous position on caste. In my view, one of the reasons why he supported some form of it was because he thought it was far too dangerous and unjust to try to revolutionize Indian society in such a way as to completely rid it of all its inherited forms of self-governance. Because in his view, India and Indians could only resist British rule because they already had these structures there. So when Gandhi told Indians, withdraw from cooperating with Britain, the reason they could do it was because they were already organized into different kinds of castes and smaller kingdoms and religious communities and villages and districts.
So this was an asset?
For him it was an asset. It was, though, an asset which had a lot of poison built into it. And what he tried to do was to, and perhaps it was futile, but he thought it was worth attempting to preserve an institution which was very ancient.
Okay.
And which had preserved Indian civilization, and to try to make it into something egalitarian. Because his fear was that if you broke the very foundations of Indian society, you would destroy that civilization, and you wouldn't know what would come to take its place. In his view, it's the very backwardness of India, what people then used to call India's backwardness, that allowed her to resist the violence of modern colonial rule. And his question to Dr. Ambedkar was, if you reject Hinduism, you are perfectly entitled to do so, but you will have to face one challenge. If you reject your own history, who are you? What identity do you have? You will become a hollow man. You will make your people into empty vessels, which anyone can then fill with anything they like. And that he thought was very dangerous. That these will become people without a past, without history. They have rejected what has made them who they are, and they will become vulnerable to all kinds of modern ideologies and lose themselves utterly. Now, Ambedkar, of course, had a quite different interpretation of this.
Sure. Now, Dr. Faisal, how did you read the storm that was waged by political activist Arundhati Roy's criticism of the Mahatma Gandhi? And she said that the generally accepted image of Gandhi was a lie, and she also accused the Mahatma of discrimination and called for institutions bearing his name to rename their institutions. Why?
Yes, well,
This was very extreme for a figure like the Mahatma Gandhi.
She, of course, is living in India and dealing with a situation in which Gandhi has for many decades been seen as the father of the nation, against whom nothing can be said. And so she wanted to destroy this idol. She thinks it's a form of idolatry, and that you should start questioning this man and what he stood for. And that is perfectly all right. The problem, of course, is that there are at least a couple of problems. One is that...
Why did she say that she accused him of discrimination? Why? Is it because of the issue related to the caste, or why?
Caste is one reason, because as we've been saying, the Mahatma actually thought it should be preserved in some form. She also thinks, and she's not alone, in thinking that his way of dealing with outcasts or untouchables or Dalits was patronizing and paternalistic at best. And she might also be right on that. It's very difficult to justify Gandhi on this. The problem, of course, is that Gandhi was hardly the man to want to continue discriminating against lower castes. He wanted the reverse. He might not have addressed the problem in the best possible way, but he did recognize it as a problem. And it's true that he had become a kind of nationalist idol whom no one can question. But over the last few decades, Gandhi has been questioned increasingly, especially by those who are on the far right of the political spectrum, those who call themselves Hindu nationalists, one of whose number had actually murdered Gandhi. So Arundhati and those like her sometimes put themselves in a very uncomfortable position, because they suddenly end up becoming allies to people whom they have no friendship for at all.
Yeah.
And in my view, Gandhi is no longer this major figure. He can be attacked freely in India.
So do you agree with Arundhati?
Not entirely. I mean, I think that Gandhi, and I think she would also agree, that Gandhi was an extraordinarily important and original thinker and political figure.
Right. And now on May 13th last year, you talked in one of your articles about nearly 50 Ismailis who were massacred on a bus in Karachi, and it was blamed on ISIS and whoever is related to it there. How do such murders, Dr. Devji, constitute the globalization of sectarian violence in the Muslim world?
I mean, this is... the Ismailis, of course, are a Shiite group, but in Pakistan, for a long time, they have never really been identified as Shia. they have their own peculiar forms of practice of worship and of identity. This is the first time they were attacked as Shia. And what that tells us is that the sectarian rhetoric which exists in the Middle East and also exists in countries like Pakistan is expanding.
And India also.
And India, of course, is expanding to include groups who have previously not been considered of any great account, because these are very small groups. So the Ismailis themselves and the other Shiite groups have therefore, as a result of such attacks, come together in a very interesting way, in a kind of pan-Shia form of identification. Now, what's interesting about this is that it does not presume any common practices. So it's not like they're all going to join each other in prayer, or they don't do the same things. They believe in quite different things. Sometimes they dress differently. They do many things differently.
They have their own peculiarities.
They do. But it's, how should I put it? It's democratic in a very interesting way, because they recognize each other. They do not do takfir against each other. They don't declare each other to be non-Muslim.
They don't fight each other.
They don't fight each other, and they support each other. So there is a sense that is developing in countries like Pakistan and India, a sense of being Shia which no longer depends upon uniformity of practices. It is a pluralistic sense of being Shia. And that is very, very interesting, because that's unusual. In my view, it hasn't really happened in the past.
So there
is solidarity.
But do you think that this is going to provoke more incidents and more attacks against people like the Ismailis or other offshoots of the Shia across India and Pakistan?
Probably. It's already started happening. This Karachi attack was very visible because it was on a bus in a major city, in Pakistan's biggest city. But there have been attacks and killings of Ismailis and of other Shia in smaller towns in the north of Pakistan and elsewhere.
Right.
So it's not simply coming from the Middle East to Pakistan. It's very
people
largely
from inside the country,
going from Pakistan outside.
Right, Dr. Faisal Devji, reader in modern South Asian history and fellow of St. Anthony's College at the University of Oxford. Many thanks indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
You're always most welcome, sir. إذن لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinside@almayadeen.net وصفحتنا على الفيسبوك من الداخل. من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.